Viewing Sunday Mass and holy days of obligations as obligatory is something that was kind of hard for me to overcome when initially coming into the church. Mainly because it was this feeling of, well, why should I be obligated to do anything? But in looking through the catechism and researching and doing a little bit of digging, basically it comes down to this understanding that there should be a natural longing of the heart to go to Mass. It's similar to if you felt obligated to kiss your husband or wife, that wouldn't necessarily be the best thing, and there's something else that's causing the desire to be lacking there instead of the actual act of, either in the example kissing husband, wife, or actually going to Mass. So why it's so important though? So Christ says, it's John 6 verse 56, he says that whoever eats his flesh and drinks his blood abides in him, and I abide in them, is what he says. So, when we start looking at the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ in Mass, and we see the consumption of it, this is actually where we are unified fully with God, and we have the supernatural experience of experiencing Him and the community that is encompassed in that, which is the body of believers that we're physically sitting with, and then also the communion of saints and everything else that abides within the church and in union with God. So, when we start looking at habits and going to church every Sunday and going on these days of obligation and actually allowing these fruits to come forward, we actually develop. So the reason that it's obligatory in the Catholic faith is because without it, we can't have the same experience with God that is possible. We can't do this on our own. I can't do this on my own. And speaking from doctrine, it's basically allowing God to work in our lives by us going to Mass and us actually participating in what the church has to offer. And that's the whole point of it, is having the availability to God. And when we actually consume the body and blood, and when we maintain the experience of Mass and the experience of what it has to offer, then we have less aptitude to do things that would be hypocritical, or things that go against what the church teaches, or what would be considered good, pure, lovely, good, and all of those adjectives that we use that are wholesome. But the reason it's considered a mortal sin, though, to neglect Mass is because we're actually denying ourselves the goodness that's offered. We're actively choosing to step away from God, and we're not choosing to submerge ourselves into everything that He has to offer. So by denying ourselves that, we begin to actually spiritually die a little bit every Sunday that we miss Mass, or every holy day of obligation that we miss. And that's not what God wants for us. He wants to see us whole and fruitful and actually experiencing everything that He has to offer. And when we neglect that, we're ultimately harming ourselves and not pursuing Him the full way that we can. So those are just my 2 cents for today. I'm going to evening Mass today because I was at the lake house with my parents kayaking and just having a good time. So it's establishing the habit, though. It's maintaining the commitment, making it a priority, and it's the most important appointment of the week. And if we can make it to daily Mass, that's even better, because the more that we subject ourselves to the liturgy, because in Mass we're not only being fed by the body and blood, but we're also being fed by the Word. So, spiritually we receive so much. And people talk about the nuns and, oh, how do they have so much joy and happiness? And it's because they're constantly around the Eucharist. They're constantly receiving the Eucharist. And the Eucharist, Christ has so much more to give that we can receive than we can offer, and so we have to reach out to that and understand what that is, so that we actually get excited about going, and we don't dread it, and we don't tap our foot through the homily or the sermon, however you want to reference it, and we actually experience it the way that it's intended for us to experience it. So curious on any thoughts or comments you may have on this week, be sure to share, and I will see you guys again next week. Happy Sunday.